Hello, my name is Chrisrin, and we are doing another video analysis artist breakdown. We will be talking about SAD-ist's most recent animation, Hog Hunt, and talking about SAD-ist's improvements, new techniques that SAD-ist has learned that we can see very clearly here in comparison to Dawn of the 16th and her previous animatics/animations. We're going to be talking about the art and the animation of the video. We're not going to be really talking about story and symbolism. We might be talking a little bit about characterization and how character animation is done, but for the most part we will be just talking about the animation itself. I will not be using the audio at all from the original video. This will be pretty much just like the previous time I did this. We will not be talking about dialogue or the music or anything like that. That is not my specialty. I am an animator and an artist. I'm not a music director. So even though I think that the music and the sound design is incredibly well done and it complements the animation very well, that is not something we're going to be touching upon here. Just to clarify, this is all speculation. I don't know SAD-ist, and I don't know, I haven't seen her Toon Boom file or anything like that. So this is all speculation in what I'm assuming, what she's done in certain ways and what she hasn't in other ways. So we start here with a shot of Wilbur, or Ghostbur in this case. Something that SAD-ist does here is we have these sort of smoke effects, right? And the smoke here has this lowered opacity in the foreground and the background. In the background, it's this kind of blurred out here. And then we see this glitch effect in the eyes. And now I'm going to assume that this glitch effect is animated, because what you could do, right, SAD-ist has a couple options with this, is you could get like a video of sort of a TV static glitch effect and overlay it right on top of the animation and then kind of do a clipping mask around where the eye is and have that video run and play while the animation is going. However, because this is animated, it seems on threes, right? It's only being changed every 3-4 frames or so. And to give a kind of a very brief rundown, because I'll be using this term a lot, of what animating on threes is, or just animating, you might hear the term animating on ones, animating on twos, animating on threes, and just to give a kind of brief rundown. So animating on threes, right, means that if we have a piece of animation that is 24 frames per second, every 24 frames is a second. And so when we're animating on threes, that means that we have, over the course of that animation, a total of 8 unique drawings. There are 8 unique frames in that because each drawing is being held for 3 frames. It's being held for 3 frames in that 24 frames, right, per second. And we'll see constantly throughout SAD-ist's animation that she animates often, I think she animates most often on threes, sometimes on twos, and every now and then on ones. In most anime or animated TV shows, you'll see things being animated on threes and twos, and ones are only used for very special occasions if a shot needs to look like extra smooth because, there's something important, like a fight scene. However, something that animators have to value a lot, especially animators in the industry, and you'll notice this also with SAD-ist's animation, is that the goal of an animator is to animate as little as possible. Right? We are trying to save time and budget, right? We have a very specific budget and time frame for these projects, and we want to have to do as little work as possible. So we are going to try and work around things and sort of trick your eye and trick the audience into thinking something has a lot of movement, but then not actually drawing a lot of unique movement. And so you will see that throughout this animation, whether it be, in this or in stuff like anime where maybe a character is just panning, like they're panning the character, they're moving the character independently, but it makes them look like their body is moving, Or a character will be still, right? The whole character drawing will be still, and only the lips are moving, only the lip sync is happening. And that is because we are trying to animate as little as possible, but still give the appearance of movement. We'll head into the next scene. Now this scene is another example of a very cool technique that SAD-ist is using, and it's called parallax backgrounds. If we watch this little brief scene through, right, we have the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Now if you watch the movement, I'm going to replay this scene, watch the way that each element in the foreground, middle ground, background move. We have this element, right, this kind of front area, and that includes this pole here, right? This is all in the foreground. Then we have this back here, this set of buildings, and then we have the background way back here. Now, each of these, if you watch it, are moving at slightly different speeds. This foreground area is moving the fastest. It's moving, again, these are all moving very slowly. However, there is a difference in the speed. This is moving the fastest. This is moving slightly less fast, and then this is barely crawling. And what this does is it gives us a sense of depth. If you've ever been in a car, you'll notice how the road or the trees next to you as you're driving will whiz by you incredibly fast. But stuff like mountains or a building in the distance will be much, much slower. By giving this extra sense of depth and by having the foreground element move faster than the background elements, it's much more complex and kind of adds just a little bit of depth rather than just having this be a standard panning shot. She could have just had this all be a singular drawing, right, and just pan the camera. And that would have still worked just fine, but SAD-ist goes out of her way to give the scene a little bit of extra depth and give us that parallax background. Also, another thing that we see here that is going to be very prevalent is what I'm going to call throughout the animation lighting points. This isn't necessarily an official term, but that's what I'm going to kind of call it, because it's almost like a lens flare, but she uses it in places that aren't lens flares, right? It's not necessarily reflecting the sun. We'll see that kind of constantly, but this is like one of the first instances I believe she uses it. And I really like how from the previous scene into the scene with the anvil, the lighting point, because this is where our eyes are focusing in the composition, because it is the brightest point of contrast on the scene. Into the next shot, they're kind of close to each other. So our eyes are already naturally in a general area where the composition is leading us through. The anvil then raises up, right? And we get this sense of weight, right? As the anvil dips and gets pulled back up. As we watch again, it kind of is getting tugged. And it almost feels like a human is at the top pulling this up. And once again, we get this lighting point here, and it's climbing up along the flag. This scene with Tubbo is a very good example of what I was saying earlier, where this scene is one frame, right? This scene is one drawing, and the only thing that is moving is this lighting point. However, because that's really the only thing we need, we don't need any extra movement, and she can save time in not drawing like these flags waving in the wind. Like, that's not necessarily needed. It just works how it is. So same thing with this anvil, right? This anvil is just getting moved up and down, and the focus is kind of coming in and out of it. And it's not necessarily animating the anvil, it's just moving it up and down with a movement tool, right? It's not being animated uniquely, it's just a singular drawing. So now we go on to the next frame, and we have this really cool lighting on the axe. I really like how we'll see the reflection here is going to shift. I really like how SAD-ist's choice to only have Tubbo's reflection in the area of light. I don't know if it's necessarily a symbolic thing. It just adds a little bit of depth to it by not having it also reflect on the shadow. It kind of makes it look a little bit unique. And then we also have, again, this lighting point that I believe climbs up the side of the axe, right? As the axe is brought up, it moves up the side of the axe. Now we have this scene, and the composition here is really unique because it makes Phil seem very distant, and it also makes him seem very small. He's basked in this yellow light that puts him out of focus a bit, right? The focus is more on the room itself, right? We have these dust particles and such, and we have the light inside the windows that are kind of coming out. And the light here actually kind of moves and crawls. You look at the light here as it kind of, the windowsill, it moves up. But the composition here places Phil as sort of this small, almost kind of mysterious figure, I want to say, but in like a good way. It's a warm light. It is a warm mystery. And then the next shot, we are showing what he's seeing. And he is seeing this very, very exaggerated pillar. I want to talk about the composition in this shot a bit. What we have are a couple things. First of all, I really like this shadow here that comes behind Phil. You can see very, very subtle, and it's casting a shadow in the back here. But what this composition does, this is a very dramatic curve. We have these curves here on the side. We have Phil here, and Phil is looking up. And in most compositions, the way that the character is looking is where the artist wants you to look. And we are inclined as people to look where someone else is looking, where we tend to follow an eye line. So we are led up here, and even the clouds are doing their job of circling, of bringing your attention to the focal point, which is this little tiny bit. Your eyes will crawl up this and look up here, and then you'll register, oh, he's looking at the anvil, he's looking at this giant pillar. Even this is obviously in the actual game, in the Dream SMP, the pillar is brought super high so that it can be dropped down, but this is super, super dramatic with how exaggerated this pole is, right? It almost looks like it can't stand on its own, but it is drawing your eye line all the way to the very, very top of the frame here. And I like how the camera, if you see, it's not just panning from like left to right, it's kind of like curving downward, right? The elements of the foreground are curving with it. And even the way that the pillar on the right kind of moves in front of Phil, or moves behind Phil, sorry. And we see here, it speeds up. It has a bit of a drag to it, that it is kind of slow and then whoom, whooshes by. And that's something we'll see a lot with SAD-ist's use of transitions, is that they have a gaining of speed as they come and go. So once again, we're here, we get another one of those lighting points with this very, very pretty background. We also have another example of the parallax. The foreground element moves the fastest. This is kind of moving pretty quickly, and the background is barely moving, if at all. We get another lighting point. Again, this shot is completely still, but the lighting point is used as an element of animation, and so is this lighting kind of climbing up, so we don't need any more than that. We get to this scene, and we'll let it play through because I want to talk about the bird's animation here. So the bird, we have that similar element of the speeding up. So the bird comes in, and then as it beats its wings, which it's going to do right here, it zooms across the screen. It's drifting, right? It's very slow here, and then that's like 4 frames or so of it just kind of being on screen, and then it beats its wings down and then flies across. And it definitely gives that kind of extra emphasis of speed. We'll watch it again. Boom, you know? So then we get this feather, and I really like this transition. So let's watch this transition go through of the feather, and then we're in the next scene. Something I want to discuss, the feathers are used to transition this scene, right? So we watch the feathers as they fall, and this one comes very close to the camera. There's a couple different ways that SAD-ist could do this. There could be a frame in between this one and this one where the feather, right, would almost come fully in front of the camera, so it would get so big that it would cover the camera. Like, let's say it was like this, right, and all this was shaded in. And then maybe even the next frame, it gets so big that the screen goes completely black, as if the feather had completely covered the camera. And that would be a very nice way to transition into this shot, where it is a very different looking setting, right? The feather would come off the camera and we would be at this area. And she could still have this same kind of camera movement of it kind of swinging to the side. But what SAD-ist does instead is she doesn't cover the whole camera. And she instead, because of the speed of the frames, lets this happen, even though it's kind of weird to go from this shot to this shot. We're suddenly on the ground. We're in a very different point of view. However, because of the way that the feather leads us in, it actually does a lot for us without necessarily having to cover that camera up and hide that transition. And what it ends up doing is it very, very clearly connects this scene to this scene. It makes us feel like we almost just kind of brought the camera down a little bit and we're in the same area. If you were to have covered up the camera with the feather on this scene, if you were to have made it completely black, we might have been, it wouldn't have been a huge deal, but it might have given us the impression that this could have been a different area. But because she decides not to cover it up, we know very clearly, our brain is telling us, okay, this is the same area. And it also helps the background color is the same, the similar trees, the same elements are here. But yeah, that's just something that she decided to do that personally, I probably would have covered the screen, right? I'm the type of person that likes these transitions that completely change what you're looking at. But she decides to go a bit more of a different route and be a bit more subtle with it. So we see the blue, and then we see this really, really awesome glitch effect. So glitches, and then we see Ghostbur, and then it transitions to techno. So we're here with this glitch effect, and what SAD-ist does is she uses like these lines, right? These kind of grayish lines, and we see it up here, she's erasing, or she might be drawing, this might be another layer, and she's drawing colors similar to the background, and she's drawing it on top. And then the camera kind of shifts abruptly. It shifts down, And then we zoom in to the blue that's on the floor here. And then the blue actually leads us into this next shot, and it almost looks like, because of where the position is, right, the blue is on this side, and then on this, it almost is like it splashes over onto Ghostbur's hand. It's a very nice way of bringing us from this shot to this shot and kind of leading us into where the blue is. The blue is giving us a focal point. We zoomed in on the floor, and now we are panning a bit, and you can tell that Ghostbur's body and Ghostbur's arm, and here actually we zoom out ever so slightly, right? We zoom out here. So it's kind of a pulsing effect. So Ghostbur's body and his arm are probably on two different layers, because if you can tell the way that Ghostbur's hand is moving, it's curving a bit more compared to the body, right? It's curving kind of up while the body is just sort of moving. We get another glitch. The screen reverses, a nice extra bit to the glitch. The hand keeps moving, we zoom into the hand, and then it flashes to the yellow. So just a very nice glitch effect. There's nothing too symbolic, I think, or special there. It just is a very well done glitch. Now we're here with the next shot, and this is with Techno and the crow that could represent Phil, but at this point it might also just represent chat. Who knows? So the particle effects are going, and we get this kind of bouncy animation on the crow. I really like how this crow is animated. The crow is designed very simply, right? It's a silhouette. Comes down, and you can see that bounce. It's not just leaning its body down. And we can see how the screen focuses. Something that SAD-ist uses a lot in this animation is focusing and unfocusing and blurring and unblurring the screen. So we're focusing right now on this element, which is probably all on its own layer. Maybe this is a foreground element, this is on its own layer, this is maybe on its own layer. And then this blurs, this actually blurs, this part blurs first. If we're looking here, this is unblurred. I believe this blurs up, and then this blurs, right? So these are three different layers, three different ways that the blur happens. And then because both of these end up going into unfocused, we end up focusing over here where the hand is. And then we have this scene, we have a nice flash transition. And I want to talk a bit about this scene in particular. Let's watch the shadow as it crawls across. If you're an artist, right, and you've drawn before, you'll know that there are something called blend modes. Blend modes are used a lot for adding shadow and adding lighting effects, right? If you don't want to do it manually, you use the blend mode. And oftentimes, like let's say for example, you would take a set of flat colors, and then you would take purple, and you would put purples in the shadowed area, and then make that layer, turn that blend mode into a multiply layer, right? And then maybe lower the opacity of it. I would assume this is what SAD-ist does. However, something unique here is that it seems like these shadows are all on the same layer, because we'll see here, so this is Tubbo's figure, right? It's roughly like here, you know, the chest is here and he's moving forward. And then we have this pillar of shadow that's roughly here. These are overlapping, right? We have this area right here that is overlapping where Tubbo's head is, right? The shape of the shadow where Tubbo's head is, and then where the pillar is. However, we are not getting a change in the tone of the color here. This tone and this tone of shadow are the same. And normally, if you have a multiplier layer, so let's say we have, for example, the shadow, right? Here is the background. So this is the background. This is that shadow pillar, that this thing. And then we have Tubbo on top of it. If this is at 25, and this is at 25%, for example, let's just say for example, these are both at 25%. When you compress these down, this area in between, right, this area that it crosses over, is going to be at 50%. So you would end up seeing a darker tone here, but we don't see that. This is very obviously the same tone. So what SAD-ist must have done is this layer where Tubbo's head is, and this area is the same, but it also moves. So what I'm guessing she has is this shadow shape of Tubbo, and she is panning it across the screen somehow independently of moving these. So I feel like it is a pan, so I don't know how it is done by hand. Or it wouldn't be done by hand, because I think it moves on ones. So unless she very carefully did it by hand, which I feel like is just too much work, like it's a bit unnecessary. What she probably did is she somehow took the shape and she panned it across the screen, but somehow on the same layer, or just figuring out a way, maybe only using this color as a way to not have the shadows overlap. And the shadows could have overlapped, like it's not a huge deal, but I think that by having the shadows not overlap, it gives more of a simplicity, and it makes it very clear what the purpose of the scene is, right? We see this figure walking across. He's almost stepping into the shadow, like he's stepping into the shadow of Schlatt, and he's stepping into the shadow of himself, of Tubbo, right? And I think it almost makes kind of an interesting dynamic that he is melding with the shadows, because Tubbo, throughout this journey of him being president, is walking in the shadow of Schlatt, and is making his own shadow, making his own name for himself as president. I love the hair animation here, the little hair tip on the top of his head and how it kind of swooshes. Very, very cute. Nice character animation. We see the beam of light that is coming on this side, giving a nice lighting to the scene. Tubbo raises the axe up, and we get one of those again, one of the lighting points that we have constantly be seeing. And it's here, and we do kind of see the background coming through this axe, and I don't think that this was necessarily intentional, because if we also see here, the axe is going through the arm of it. But because these frames, again, are on the screen for maybe a couple seconds, it doesn't really matter that much. It's not crazy noticeable. We get a smear frame, and the lighting point follows the smear down, and it leads us into the next shot. We have this smear frame, or this kind of, I don't know if it's really a smear frame, it's a transition frame, where we have this light down here. It's not all one color, right? It's very subtly different. This is kind of a yellowish, but then we get this bright, bright yellow here, and this yellow where the axe was. And then when we go to the next scene, where that yellow was is where the torch is. So it does a very good job of, even the transition frame brings us where our eyes are supposed to focus. I also like with this shot, we see Quackity, Tubbo, and Fundy all in focus, and Rambo is out of focus. Rambo's more in the background, because that is kind of how his character is. His character, he is less dedicated to the Butcher Army, so he is in the background, he is blurred slightly. And I believe that this torch is animated on either 2s or 3s. So something we see here in this shot with Tubbo and Quackity looking over the House of Techno, and this is something we've seen throughout consistently in the animation, and we'll continue to see if you look for it, is SAD-ist really likes using this idea of focusing and unfocusing the background. And she didn't use this as much during her previous animation, Dawn of the 16th. I think that this is probably a new technique that she's learning how to use. However, I do think that specifically in the case of this animation, and again, this is my opinion, I think she sometimes overuses this maybe a tad too much. I think there are some very beautiful shots in the animation that, due to wanting to blur to add depth, it can sometimes take away the crispness of some of these really awesome moments of art. And while I think that the blurring and the unfocusing and refocusing are fantastic ways to add depth in certain situations, in certain contexts, I think that there are some moments in this animation where it is a little bit overused. And again, that's just my opinion. We get a really nice cape animation here, very flowy. This shot has a couple unique things to it. I really like how SAD-ist does a lot to really put emphasis on Techno's expression here. I think in comparison to her Dawn of the 16th animatic, Techno looked a lot almost younger, and here we see there's a stubble. We see the stress underneath his eyes. We see almost a grittiness. We see he's growing arm hair, and he has more of a ruggedness and an intensity that we didn't have before in her previous animation. And then when this fog cloud comes over, we actually transition from a line drawing into a silhouette, and it does a very nice job. We see this overlapping. And this is a very good example of what I was talking about before. Remember when I was talking about the multiply layers? So this isn't a multiply, but what this is, you can see all of the way that this is layering on top of each other, right? You have this element here, this element here, and then even the element of the overlapping with the silhouette. And it's all overlapping, and so this is darker than this because the opacity for this is probably, we'll say maybe 30. Right, if this is also 30, then this will be 60 of this red color, and then combine that with the silhouette, also probably this fog is at a slightly different opacity, right? You can tell underneath the fog, these are two different tones. So the fog might be at, let's say, a 15% opacity. I'm just throwing out numbers. This is all estimates. So then this will be, what, 60 plus 15 is 75. So this is at a 75 opacity, like red tone, and it's all like overlapping on each other. When it overlapped, we didn't see that change in tone. But here, when we overlap, we do see it. So I love how just bouncy and expressive the fog is. There's an art to making fog look really expressive and natural. I really like the use of this opaque fog that comes across the screen, and suddenly we're transitioned back. It's used as a transition tool from this shot with Techno being very close to the camera to suddenly we're back here. And it gives the appearance of the camera panning back. So the axe swinging up into, I believe this is Quackity's hand. We have the smear frame of Quackity whoop, grabbing the axe as it kind of apparates, or he's pulling it down from somewhere. The very opaque fog covering where Techno was. I really like how the fog layers on top of the axe. You can even see a very faint outline of the axe here. The opacity fades from the axe a bit. And then when we have a smear frame showing Techno, we see the yellow eyes. And that's a very nice lead in to Techno's yellow glowing eyes. I like how the smear frames use that yellow to lead us into it. In the previous shot, Tubbo and Fundy were standing here. But because of how this is framed, it would kind of clutter up the scene if we had Fundy and Tubbo standing in the background. SAD-ist instead opts to remove them from the scene to give us focus on Techno. Almost as if if Tubbo and Fundy were there, Techno already took them out before getting to Quackity. We have this really dynamic pose here. Techno's left arm just looks like it's gone, but that's because it's brought way, 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 way back, right? His arm is pulled all the way back there, and then when we pan over, we see it. We see how far his arm is brought back, and it's preparing us for that lead in. And then the smear frame, we see the intensity. Look at how intense the scribbling is underneath where his eyes are. And where the mouth is, it's just so, it has so much intensity and like rawness to it. The smear frame cuts across. It started here and it follows up by going all the way across. Let's play this through. The silhouette. Slice. And I really like how the intensity of the cut is so hard that the camera in the next shot shakes in movement. It follows up the movement. If the impact of the sword is over here, we start here and then we curl back this way and then center out. The sword impacts the camera of the next shot, like how, in a sense, that battle there is what leads to this intense meeting. We get really nice backgrounds. I believe that Tubbo, Rambo, Quackity, and Fundy here are all colored in, and this is something that I talked about a bit in my previous analysis, is SAD-ist will do her best when she can to not have to color in characters. When possible, she'll just delete the line art behind them that are in the background because it's not necessary. And you can specifically see in ones that she colors the characters in, you can see all the line art for the most part is closed. There's no openings in the line art, and this means that she was probably able to go through with a bucket tool and fill all these characters in. So you can even see here where she probably missed this spot. This is where a bucket tool happened, right between Rambu's legs. Yeah, because he's not wearing the apron. So this is probably where she forgot to erase and show the background, is you can see right there. So this shows she's coloring these characters and she's using a paint bucket tool. Another element of animation is you always want the character will move first and then the clothes and hair will always follow through. So you see that kind of here. His head turns and then the hair follows next and kind of bounces. The glass shards come boom, like launching towards the screen, and then the background kind of moves at a different speed. Look where Fundy's feet are, right? You see that the middle ground is moving on a different track than the background. The lighting from this scene to this scene is a tad different. The background color is a bit different. However, because we established what the background looks like in the previous shot, it's not that dramatic. It's not that drastic. We see Tubbo come in. We are trying to get as minimal animation as possible to make it still seem like it's animated. So Tubbo here, you're only really seeing a difference in the hair here, right? This hair gets brought back and forward. But if you look here, right, notice this hair shape, and then notice this hair shape. It's the same shot. So she's reusing this shot, right? Notice this here, and then this here. She's reusing this shot so she doesn't have to draw more. And then the hair kind of comes down and relaxes. So we go to the next one. We see what I believe is Phil's ender chest, I think. I'm not actually too sure, but I'm guessing this is Phil's ender chest, and it's pointing out that the compass is not in there, right? Techno's compass is not in the chest. We get a couple like glitch effects with the skull, and then we get the next shot, so I'll kind of let these play a bit. So this shot now, we can very clearly see that Tubbo's body is on a different layer than Tubbo's arm because we see the difference in the focus. This part is very blurred out compared to Tubbo's arm, which is very in focus. So this arm and this compass are probably on the same layer, and then Tubbo's on a different layer in the back. So I really like how the compass moves. A very subtle animation, but it drops, and then we get this really nice smear frame, and then it kind of goes to the side, and then it ends up settling. This next shot we get, I'll let it play through, that bit. We watch the gradient. It intensifies, right? The lighting intensifies, and it leads us into how the next scene is colored. If we went from this to then this, it might be a bit too quick of a transition. But because SAD-ist takes this gradient and like lights it up, it's a very nice lead-in to this very dramatic lighting that's in this next scene with Phil. And something small to note about the composition, I'm guessing that this is intentional. The biggest point of contrast in this scene is going to be this point, because it is the brightest piece of light in an area that is mostly shadow. So your eye is going to be drawn here. This is the focus of the scene. Being drawn there, it's roughly around where Quackity's shoulder is. And so if your eye line is somewhere in this area, your eye line now automatically is going to follow the direction that these arrows are pointing. So the chestplate armor design is used to point your eye line up to Quackity, who is the central focus point. Techno with glasses. There's nothing special to this scene. I just really like Techno with glasses. I really like how the lighting whips with the pointer. Let's talk about how this shot is the best shot in the entire animation. I don't care about Techno's totem transformation. None of that matters. This shot is the best composed shot in the whole animation. Let me explain why. The point of this shot is to lead us into this shot, right? It's kind of showing these parallels between Phil being trapped in his house and then the Butcher army being out and hunting. We have the main elements here are we have these pillars on the side. Okay, they're kind of blurred. They frame Phil. The highest point of contrast is the black right underneath Phil's hat. So we have this black here. So our eyes are being brought here. We have an arrow literally in Phil's clothing pointing us up. This whole area is where we're supposed to be looking. We have lines here that are framing Phil. We have these humps that are all along here. We have that, and then let's look at the next scene. Let's look at the next frame. Notice how the composition is. We still have, boom, there's two figures on either side. We have the central focus point being Quackity. We have literally the areas that the bridges were are a similar shape to the trees in the background. It is a perfect composition to switch in between from. Let's look at these back to back. Look at how perfect that transition is. Your eye is naturally going to be at where Quackity is, and it is the perfect way to transition from arguably one shot that has very, very different lighting. But because the composition is so similar, it is perfect. Your brain just instantly knows where you're supposed to be looking at. It is masterful. I absolutely love how these two shots are composed. Absolutely beautiful. The weak wing, the wing that's all broken, just kind of raises up, but this one you can tell it's very strong because it literally like flaps up, while this just kind of pans up, it raises up. You can tell that this is definitely his stronger wing. We get this really cool skull effect. Another really, really cool impact / smear frame. Notice Techno's character animation. I love this bit of character animation. I really like specifically this lip sync. It almost looks like Techno is pouting here. The next shot where he's letting it all out feels much more impactful because you have that build up. And then the arms, the very nice foreshortening on the arms as they kind of come forward. Slam down with the smear frame, we get an impact frame here.
Hey, I'm Mel, and I just wanted to talk about impact frames for a quick moment. So I come from a background mostly studying traditional art and being a little bit more educated in traditional art and studying a lot of comics, all sorts of comic books, all sorts of graphic novels. And something that stood out between SAD-ist impact frames was super eye-opening when it comes from background in traditional media. They have this thing called splash frames instead of impact frames, which is kind of what we call the the black screen with the white movement or whatever that SAD-ist uses. But splash frames are full page frames of a comic meant to highlight actions or important moments. So this could be a flash of a landscape, it could be a flash of an action, it could be meant to introduce a character, it could be any number of things, but very specifically it is a bunch of frames on a page that usually, you go through the eye of a comic book page and then one full page that highlights an action. And SAD-ist style specifically reminded me of this method despite the change from traditional media to digital media and how different those two are. It'd be very easy for her to just flash black in scenes with combat or impactful things or movement. Specifically, in this instance, I'm talking about the moment where Techno throws splash potions down against the ground, the I choose blood moment. And instead of just flashing black, instead of just a black frame to break up the viewer's concentration and imply that action, she uses a mostly black frame and then highlights a character's silhouette in white. It's a very simple change, but it's completely underrated. Even in the final frames, and I'm sure these have been paused over and broken down individually by so many people, where Techno flashes with the black and pink silhouette, and there's the full pink screen and white screen, and then the inverted white and green silhouette where the green is on his hands and the screen's all white. One by one, these frames don't mean much, and honestly could have just been colorful flashes. If she wanted to skip out on some of the work, it could have been black flash, a pink flash, a green flash, white flash, to draw the eye and draw that color that was very specifically supposed to be, eye-popping, drawing away from the pink. But the attention to detail and the dedication to these otherwise, in-betweens make the flashes at full speed a completely different picture to your eye, even if you're not completely aware of what exactly the frames are or haven't slowed down the video at half speed to see all of the frames individually, which I'm sure a lot of us have. But seeing those quick flashes, not skipping out on those final frames and those in-betweens to draw emotion and draw action. Another one that comes to mind is the pickaxe swing that goes up towards Quackity's teeth. And if you pause very closely, there's a flash black and then there's a pickup. There's this pickup where it goes from, Techno swinging and you see Quackity's face, and then there's a flash, and then for a very split second, you see a frame where Quackity's lip is drawn a little bit up and you see that pickaxe making contact finally, and it's only for a split second, and honestly, the animation would be fine without it. But at full speed, when you see that, your mind automatically supplies the connect of that pickaxe and see that all together. Your mind very clearly sees the pickaxe going into the teeth, just as Techno suggests, and just as the animation suggests, without actually showing that in full force. But that final, in-between frame fully implies that motion and fully connects it together and cements it in your head, even if you don't go through one by one just to pick out the one frame or the very few frames where Quackity's lip is just a little bit up and that connection is implied. And I just thought that difference was really cool. The very quick in-betweens and the full blacks with the very bright, vibrant actions, or the way that they silhouette a character, is a really interesting way to draw the eye. And although traditional media and digital media are very different, and stories told in animation versus stories told in comic books get two ideas across very different ways, it reminded me of that splash frame and splash comic idea, where there is something very specific that draws the eye and ties the whole thing together, even if it's not explicitly implied, and even if it's not, in the grand scheme of things, as important as the rest of the flow of everything else involved. And just as a mostly traditional artist in study, it really interested me to see how the same effect and feeling could be applied in a different way across different medias and in SAD-ist animations versus my usual romping ground, which is comics and traditional art. And that's just about it. I'd like to add this isn't actually something new that SAD-ist has incorporated just into this animation. This has been present from even some of her earliest animations with the Dream SMP and the Warriors animatic. There's the moment where I think Sapnap pearls behind Tubbo and swings his sword, and there's the black and then the white flash of the sword's arc, and then it cuts back. And then there's plenty of times in the Dawn of the 16th animatic where someone shoots with a rocket launcher and it highlights like their arm or someone's silhouette of it being exploded. I'm fairly certain there's a part in the Dawn of the 16th as well when Phil grabs Wilbur and there's the black and the flash outlines Phil's wings. Also very important impact frames, but I thought it was just necessary to talk about how that makes the viewer feel and how that makes us feel in our mind, and how that can be compared across different medias, and how although different medias are very different and tell stories very different ways, they have some of the same emotional draw and they have some of that same technique to tie everything together. All in all, I just think it's very neat to compare medias, and I think that these impact frames are very underrated, but in the grand scheme of things, really tie everything together and really tie this action-packed moment and this combat and everything together in the end.
We get these very nice impact frames. I believe we get 2 here. So as it slashes, Tubbo looking very shocked, and then another one, Foom slashes. Tubbo, his weight is being pulled back and he's like falling back. He falls and then he bounces up a little bit, right as he's kind of falling to the snow. Raising his arm up as quickly as possible, we get a smear frame with the axe as it's getting held up. We feel the weight of Techno's pushing on the sword. So here's where it impacts, and then Tubbo's arms are being brought down. He falls into it, and then he brings his arms back up. So let's watch it. Throwing it down, and then the weight, it bounces in a way. We get this really cool smear. Yeah, look at that. So we're going from this sword, it's smearing, and then it leads into the sword from this other perspective. So in this composition, this is the horizon line, and Quackity is very, very small on this side. But then when we move to Techno being the focal point, Techno looks much bigger, and the horizon line's a bit lower, but it kind of accentuates, even though Techno is smaller on the screen, because of the size of like Fundy and then like Rambo and Tubbo, it makes Techno, despite being smaller, he still feels like he's very in control of the situation, almost, despite obviously Pearl being threatened by Quackity, but he looks like an intimidating figure, comparing this composition to the previous one. Now we get a very good example of doing as little work as possible to still get the animated feeling. So notice as Quackity is lip syncing here, his body isn't moving, his hand isn't moving, Carl isn't moving, it's just the lip syncing. For quite a couple frames, but it's just the lips, and then it's just the lips. We're trying to do as little unique drawing as possible to still get the feeling of movement. That character animation, how he kind of dips down, his eyes and his face kind of scrunch up. It's open here, and then as it comes down, the eyebrows furrow, we get this little nose bit as it scrunches up together. We get and now this next sequence is very, very fast. Like, look at that. A lot of those frames, even though there's probably a lot of time that went into these, like especially this one, on frame for, let's count how many frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 frames this is on. Barely, not even 1/3 of a second. And there's still a lot of time and energy put into these, right? We see this beautiful shot again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames, maybe 8 if you count the transition, to put energy into the perspective of the houses and you know, all of this, and for it to literally be on frame for 7 seconds. That's the life of an animator. We're seeing that use of minimal animation. All these characters are doing are panning. You could have, like, arguably you could have Fundy like a bit of a walk cycle with both of them. Maybe they're like bouncing back and forth their feet, or Fundy could be like swinging his arms. But it's not needed, because all they need to do is pan across the screen, and they even go out of focus because Phil's is the focus. So We don't even need animation here. There's no point in drawing it. I really like this shot here because even though we're transitioning into very much a different shot, the way the camera pans, it pans over to the right, and it almost looks like it's swiveling around, and then we're seeing Tubbo and Fundy. So it almost looks like we're now looking from, almost from Phil's perspective, like we're turning to see what he's seeing.
Hey, my name is Mifi, and I just wanted to talk about some details that I thought were really cool animation-wise and in the character behavior. How easily Techno resisted against his chains when Fundy and Quackity were holding him down. In the part where he asks what they did to Philza, he easily pulls Fundy and Quackity to the side when he struggles, and I think that just shows how he is very strong and he does not have to do this. He could easily get away at any time, but he does not want Carl to get hurt, and he doesn't want Philza to potentially be hurt in the process.
For this shot, I really like how the chains are animated here. We have Techno pulling at them, and you see he's like biting down. He's struggling against these, and at the same time he's pissed because he's yelling. He's yelling about Phil. And we see Fundy is struggling a bit with the chains, like they're a bit slack right now. Quackity has to go in to restrain him back. Fundy pulls, and as he yanks, you can see, as he pulls back, you see Techno's hand already starts to move, and then the full impact of that pull is felt on the next frame, right where both of his arms are, boom, he swings around. So swing and then pull back. We see Puns and Dream, and notice how Puns and Dream's characters are animated. So Dream puts his hand up to gesture towards Puns, but it's very lazy, right? He's not even like fully extending his hand out, very lazily bringing and curling his fingers up, almost like lax gesture of like, okay, it's time. And Puns looks like he's bored. He brings out the ender pearl from underneath his cloak, pulls it out, kind of tosses it around like it's not a huge deal, and then he kind of just underhand chucks it. Boom, chucks it. The ender pearl comes in, and note his expression hasn't changed at all, right? He's not really excited for the fight or anything like that. And then when he comes down here, he teleports, and it's kind of a cool little transition because the pearl, boom, teleports. And I like the use of the purple. I also think this wasn't intentional, but some of these, if you look here, it looks like frowny faces and little smiley faces. I don't think that was intentional. I just think it looks kind of funny, considering he works for Dream. So the cloak comes off, the potions fall, boom.
Rambo here only attacks Puns when Puns attacks him. And I know that Rambo said this on his stream, but I really thought I should mention it because it's a really nice character behavior detail that was shown throughout actually the whole animation. When the Butcher Army was fighting Techno, he was just seen in the background standing with his axe and helping Tubbo when he was down. And in the house search scene, he was seen just standing there with his axe again, and he's not searching through Phil's stuff like the rest of the Butcher Army is.
Look at his face. Again, hasn't really changed from the previous expression. He's just, this is Puns doing business. You know, Puns on the job. Now, I like with the smear here, there is a very blocky smear frame here, but that's because the next thing that Rambo spawns is a shield. And so SAD-ist uniquely uses these like kind of blocky smears for the shields. Crossbow bolt coming from the background character, out of focus, comes in focus, and we know it to be Tubbo. Tubbo drawn with very minimal detail because it's like there's no real point because he's so small on screen. We're over at Tubbo, and then I believe we get, yeah, look at the blockiness of the smear before the shield comes in. And we know here that Tubbo is not colored in, or at least his character isn't colored in, I'm gonna assume. Yeah, because we can even see here, so you see the difference in the background color? So you see this kind of grayish color, and then it's like yellow. So we see that in Tubbo's character art, and then we can notice that the line art here wasn't fully erased. So we know that Tubbo isn't colored in. I'm guessing that this background went fully through, and she just erased the area around Tubbo. Here too we can also see. Again, there are moments in this animation where she colors the colored characters and where she doesn't, and that's totally fair either way. So we can see that she erased roughly here, and then when the character moves, oh wait, that's kind of interesting, because it's not fully erased here, but we can see it through underneath there. So I'm wondering what she did here, because this character isn't colored in, but it's still moving, but we see that there is a background to it. That's very, very interesting. Smear frame of the lever gets pulled down. The lever just completely disappears. Very nicely done. Smear. I like how the background goes from a very bright yellow to a white. The white almost gives it kind of a, not an angelic feel, but like Techno's life is flashing before his eyes kind of moment. It erases everything else away, and it just puts focus on the moment of death coming for Techno and Techno himself. The zoom in and then the gradual falling of the anvil. Very, very well done as it comes to impact. And then the next scene, we see Ghostbur's reaction, but I really like how the gradient very quickly transitions back to reality. The moment that flashed before Techno's eyes as death was coming to him has now switched back into the reality where death is hitting him in the face. And that thing that it is hitting him with is an anvil. And the anvil comes smashing down. And it almost looks like the anvil was stopped by the totem. It's like the anvil came crashing here, and the totem is literally like lifting it and preventing it from coming down on him. And then this totem animation is very similar to how totems work in Minecraft, and how when you die, the totem will pop up on your screen and kind of do that turning, tilting thing. Then we get some beautiful, let's let this play out so we can explain it. Beautiful, beautiful smear animation coming in to show Techno getting resurrected. I really like, if you look at the details, the green is literally like stitching him together. It is stitching him back to life. Like these are getting stitched up. We have this like kind of zigzag. The blood is swooping back into his body, all the gore that fell out. And notice how Techno's mouth is wide open, right? This is probably very painful. And as it's finishing, he bites down. He is establishing himself. He is biting and gritting his teeth down onto this. And I think, does his chin come forward a bit? He drops his head a bit as he kind of moves down. And it's almost like his neck, he's falling forward. And notice the weight of his movement in the next shot. He falls down, and then he kind of like, he stumbles and catches himself as he pulls his arm out of being stuck in the cage, which is what happened in the game. I really like how the weightiness almost goes to show that Techno just experienced something that probably was very painful. And you can feel his exhaustion almost coming from it. I like how Techno's little ears perk up, noticing Quackity. Quackity's very intense expression. We're really seeing that reaction of, how in the world are you not dead yet? More character animation from Techno. Imagine you're Techno in this situation. You have just come back from the gates of death. You were standing at those gates, and you somehow are still alive. You're confronted by the possibility of death again, but it's Quackity. It's a mortal man. Techno really does is laugh in the face of this danger, because even despite what Techno just been through, he's literally wearing the scar of what he just experienced, and he is laughing in the face of Quackity, so confident and so cocky, because he is fully aware and assured of how experienced he is in comparison to Quackity, and how he will be able to win this fight despite what he just went through. And Quackity is pissed. And you see that, especially with this frame, this smear frame that comes forward. Quackity's eyes are doing that scratchy thing that SAD-ist sometimes does. And we see the frame of the axe lagging behind him and coming to follow through, and we get the smear. This axe, I don't even think was really swinging towards Techno. It's coming to swing back. She does this a lot of extra movement to prepare for this axe swing that is now coming towards Techno. That Techno then dodges. And we get this really, really awesome fight scene.
And I also want to talk about the fight between Techno and Quackity, because it also shows just how strong Techno is and just how he could really fight the whole Butcher army and get away without being hurt. So in the fight here, Techno is very agile on his feet. He knows what he's doing. It's like he's done this a million times before, and I'm sure he has, because he's the blood god. And Quackity, in comparison, looks very sluggish and slow, and he looks like he does not know what he's doing, and he looks like he's getting far ahead of himself, even with a more advanced weapon than Techno. And he almost looks silly in comparison, which does tie into his character in canon.
You can tell how experienced Techno is compared to how inexperienced Quackity is. Quackity is a bit more sluggish. He's just kind of swinging, and he's reflecting when he can, but he gets stuck, and he gets stuck in Techno's pickaxe. Techno probably doesn't fight with the pickaxe very often, but due to his experience in combat is able to make use of it, and he's even like flourishing by like swinging it around and kind of playing with it. He grabs the axe with all of his weight. First of all, he locks it, and then he springs off the ground and pulls it with his weight, causing Quackity to get off balance, and then uses that weight to fling it and disarm Quackity. Fling the axe, and it breaks into the wall, and then the pickaxe comes around, and we get, again, this strike isn't, or this strike here isn't meant to hit Quackity. It's meant for a build-up. It's building up to come behind and hit out. He is winding it up, and SAD-ist here does 2 wind-ups, right? She does 2 wind-ups for Quackity's axe hit as it comes back, and then comes up, and then comes down, with Techno coming forward, winding up, and then impact. We see Tommy for the first time in this animation. Kind of a bit of dialogue between them, pretty typical lip syncing. And then I really like this walking animation from Techno. It feels very smooth. I think she's panning the character along while also still giving an extra movement to the animation, drawing some different frames. We see here that Tommy and Techno are both colored in. You see their difference from how the gradient in the background is and the color of them. Tommy comes into focus, and then we get this very nice, lovely lighting animation gradient. Let's watch it again. Now, did you notice something? How many frames do you think this is animated on? Do you think that this is on 3s, 2s, or 1s? Specifically the lighting, the gradient lighting. What do you think that's on? Think about it for a second. This is animated on 1s. So if we're going here frame by frame, so I'm clicking frame by frame here. This is animated on 1s. And I'm not exactly sure how SAD-ist did this, because what I'm going to assume she did is she used a clipping mask and had kind of a clipping mask around the area that she wanted the light to come in, and then slowly panned the light into view through this scene. So it would pan and it would animate every frame. However, I'm not sure exactly how she chose that shape, because if you look here, there's kind of a weird inconsistency with how this is lined, right? This is part of the background. It doesn't feel like she necessarily like it's very soft brushy, right? But we even see here there is an indication of where the fur is, right? And how it's aligning on the plane of where Tommy is. So I'm very curious what the technique was that she decided to do to show this thing and how it's animated, because what clipping mask did she use? Did she because she didn't just draw a shape and then she could have had a shape drawn and then slowly kind of had something that erased it. But yeah, very, very well done here with the lighting. I really like how the gate pops in, but yes, that's all animated on 1s, and that's why it looks so smooth. So Tommy's expression, we see his reaction, and then we see what he's reacting to. And then we get this lovely animation with Techno. Arms out. This scene actually reminds me a lot of the vault scene that we had in Dawn of the 16th. Techno kind of has this similar animation, this similar gesturing, and it's very nice. And then we get the really cool smears here. So this is the first transition frame. We see the red eyes, we see the skulls in the background, and then we get Techno kind of basked in this black. The very red background, then the green. And I want to imagine that the green, symbolic of Dream, and how the white and green, like Techno is going to work with Dream to do Doomsday. But maybe that's overthinking it a bit. And then this really nice logo where the arrow kind of eases in. Very, very, very well done. And that is the end of the animation. And that pretty much wraps up everything that I wanted to talk about. This animation is incredibly well done, and definitely a step up from Dawn of the 16th. Dawn of the 16th is masterfully done, but this is another level that SAD-ist has been able to reach. If you want to watch this, I have left the video down in the description below. Please, please, please go watch that now that you've seen this video. You can watch that, and maybe there are things that I didn't notice that you picked up on. Feel free to leave in the comments if there's anything in particular that I might have missed or looked over that you really, really liked about the video, about the animation, and let's feel free to discuss in the comments below. I really enjoyed talking about Dawn of the 16th on the previous video, and I want to thank the few people that came onto, a couple of my friends who came and kind of also talked about their favorite parts of the animation. I will link their socials below. Thank you very, very much for watching, and if you have stuck all the way through this. I am also an animator and artist. If you would like to follow my Twitter account below, or if you would like to subscribe to the channel, feel free to. But if you enjoyed me talking about this and you would like to maybe even request a different video that I discuss or something in the future, feel free to leave it in the comments and let me know. Thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely rest of your day.